On into your latest piece for The Ink is entitled The Reckoning That Wasn't. Tell us what you mean by that.
So I think last week it was 6 months since the election in November that stunned a lot of people. And it occurred to me that back then in November, there was a lot of talk about reckoning in a lot of different places. Progressives, movement spaces, Democratic Party leaders, centrist groups like Third Way, the press. We're not seeing certain things. How could this happen again in America? There's a lot of promised reckoning, reflection, introspection. And 6 months on, I kind of took a survey of, those things. I've been in a lot of those rooms over the last 6 months. And I have to say, this was the reckoning that wasn't. Reflecting on so many of those conversations in public and in private over the last 6 months, it struck me that in so many of these worlds that promise reckoning, that promise rethinking, what should our party be? What does a pro-democracy movement look like? What should the press function like? There was kind of a smugness and a defensive-ness, and nope, we're doing everything perfectly.
What you're saying, the Democratic establishment?
Well, I think you can go down the list.
Smugness.
So start with the Democratic Party, right?
Right.
Which should really be at the top of the list of what is a profound rethinking of what it means to have a pro-democracy party when you're running against that, someone frontally going after Medicaid, as we were talking about. And you've had no real rethinking. You've had, individual leaders reaching out to people saying, what do we do? What do we do? But anybody who's tried to change anything, David Hogg, others, the DNC kicked out. They picked a very lackluster chair. I would say the other, you look at the progressive movement space where I've also spent time. No real reckoning there. You have just a continued sense of everything we're doing is perfect. Let's just do, the land acknowledgements and all this academic jargony stuff that no one understands, that alienates people that don't understand what those things are. No reckoning there. I think you have, leaders, individual Democratic leaders who have just been completely disappointing to most people watching this, who have not stood up, not showed spine. People have raised their voice. It's the thing I hear most from people. You haven't had one leadership shuffle. You haven't had one new leader. You haven't had anybody say, you know what, I'm not adequate to this moment. This sounds like a very negative analysis, and it is, but I think what I wanted to call people's attention to is there's a risk of becoming Trump-like in opposing Trump. There's a risk in becoming as defensive, as smug, as self-certain, as incurious. Incuriosity was sort of the thing I found the most. And all these people and institutions who said, we have to look at ourselves. No one, as far as I can tell, ended up really looking at themselves. And no one has ended up really saying, we need a completely different kind of party. We need to report the news differently. What does anybody think they need to do differently 6 months on? I don't think you stand up for democracy with values of kind of closedness. Yeah. And I think the value of curiosity, openness, is the only way to beat whatever Donald Trump is.
Well, and what Democrats need to be curious about is how they lost to people making less than $50,000 to Donald Trump. I mean, they say Donald Trump's evil, he's a racist, he's this, he's that, he's other. The focus now, if you're a Democrat, I'm just talking to somebody that's run an election or two, it's not what's behind me, it's what's in front of me. Donald Trump is not going to be running again in 2028. And so the Democratic Party can keep looking backwards, but they don't need to look to Donald Trump. They need to look to the people who voted for Donald Trump and why they lost to Donald Trump. And as Anand says, I see no evidence that they're doing that. Like, we've had people on this show. Why did working Americans making less than $50,000 vote for Donald Trump? And they can't answer the question. Democrats can't answer that question.
And by the way, why did people of color drift towards him after 4 years of experiencing him as president, right? If these things don't provoke reckoning and real rethinking, we don't have one new leader.
Right.
It's remarkable.
Well, what's remarkable and what needs a reckoning is for Democrats, for actually more than just the Democrats, more than just a political party, is how is it that one specific political party, the Republican Party, seems gravitated towards, captured by, and clings to one individual, Donald J. Trump? How did he do this? How did he transform politics in America and become so all-consuming to so many people, including Democrats, including people making $50,000 a year or less, including laborers, firefighters, police officers? What is it about him? You have to look at your enemy in order to defeat an enemy. You have to know who you're fighting. It seems to me, and a lot of other people, I think, that the Democrats simply have never sat down and defined who he is and how to go about it.
First, you have to know who you are, and the Democrats don't know who they are.
Right.
And secondly, you have to know who your opponent is. And
You
again,
gotta know how to fight him.
Again, they're not running against Donald Trump in 2028. Maybe they're running against him a little bit in 2026, but they're not running against him in 2028. Right? So, but don't they need to figure out who they are first?
And they have to know what battlefield they're on. I think the answer to your question, one of them, is that Donald Trump understands, maybe uniquely, that politics in this day and age is played on a level of emotion and psychology and attention as much as it is on policy. And it's incredible to me how few people understand that on the other side. How few people understand the importance of being having a cultural figure, a cultural presence that helps people sort through. Donald Trump, for all of his profound personal and cerebral limitations, is a culture maker and is a player in the culture and is participating in the meaning-making process that voters are engaged in every day. Why did this happen? Why did that happen? Why are eggs expensive? Why are my kids learning this in school? Donald Trump is running almost unopposed in the cultural meaning-making process in this country. And the Democratic Party, and we can talk about other institutions, the Democratic Party, above all, has abdicated any role in participating in the cultural process. Instead, it stands at the end of the pipeline saying, please $5 and please vote, and is ignoring 90% of where politics happens, which is where people figure out the world, figure out what they think, make sense of things, and form preferences.
And John Heilman, certainly Democrats have struggled to handle Donald Trump, but they've even been worse at sort of identifying themselves and pitching a message going forward. A few exceptions. We see the crowds that Bernie Sanders and AOC have drawn. But as you speak to members of the party, what are they saying here? Because some of the Democrats I've talked to are frustrated that even though they're still doing it, there's a party right now is still consumed with the past and not looking for the future and a new message.
Right. Well, John, I think that there's a couple of important things to say. One is to Anand, the end of Anand's last point. It is true and also not true that Democrats, and when I say Democrats here, I don't mean the party, but liberals, the left of center, whatever, aren't part of the cultural conversation. In fact, there are a couple different cultural conversations going on in America at the same time. And one of the reasons why the cultural conversation on the right has gotten so much traction is because of the fact that the left, the Democrats, whatever you want to call them, has been seen as dominating the mainstream cultural conversation for so long. Who controls Hollywood? Who controls the media? You have to be kind of nuts to think that the mainstream media and the mainstream entertainment establishment in America isn't largely left of center. What's happening is there's these two different conversations, and what has happened is that conversation, this gets to your point, John, is that right now, somehow the Democratic Party finds itself in a place where it is no longer the home of working Americans, largely. And if Bobby Kennedy, the coalition that Bobby Kennedy was trying to put together in 1968 before he was killed, that coalition of working class whites, working class Latinos, working class African Americans, that coalition has been put together more effectively by Donald Trump than by anybody in the Democratic Party. That's a huge problem. And to Joe's point, that conversation of how to right that wrong. I mean, I think there's no Democrat in the country who would say it's messed up that we are no longer the party of working people, and that Bobby Kennedy's coalition is being put together by Donald Trump more than by any of our leaders. How do we fix that problem? What does the Democratic Party have to do to become in many respects, what it was at its most effective over the course of the last 40, 50 years? That conversation is happening at the most superficial level, at the most performative level. You hear Democrats all across the spectrum saying, we need to change. We need root and branch reform. We need to moderate. We don't need litmus tests anymore. We have Alyssa Slotkin, who I really like and respect, but who is out there saying, well, we can't be woke and weak anymore. No one is talking about what actually that means. And there's a Substack writer named Matthew Iglesias who called that performative moderation. A lot of what the party is doing right now is purely performative. No one is talking about, okay, what's the position that you want to take that's outside the mainstream of Democratic thinking that is going to mean that you're not woke and weak if that is what you think. What's the thing if you're on the left that if you say like AOC does, there should be no litmus tests anymore? What's a liberal litmus test, Congresswoman, that you'd like to violate now in the spirit of making the party different than what it has been and what it has been perceived to be over these last couple cycles? Everyone is talking at the most superficial level and not at the deep level that like the Democratic Leadership Council did back at the end of the 1980s and early 90s when the party went through this same problem. Right. And they had to have the same kind of reform. That was real reform. This is right now, so far, superficial talk about reform and not real reform.
Well, and you just look inside of Congress, Anand, and I don't think anybody that watches the show would confuse my politics with AOC's politics. Just
you've never been confused with each other.
No one's confused me with AOC's politics, and yet I sit here. Fairly conservative independent, absolutely flummoxed by a Democratic Party that refuses to let her in leadership. Like, proving that the House is not a meritocracy, never was a meritocracy. The fact that they're afraid to have the person who is considered in polls to be the voice and the face of the Democratic Party right now. Moderates, take a deep breath. Everything shakes out. You're gonna be okay. But she does a better job getting out there and explaining the inequities that drive working Americans to Republicans. She also, to her credit, she went and she talked to people who voted for Donald Trump and voted for her, and didn't go, "What's wrong with your head?" She's like, "Tell me, why did you do that?" And by the way, she's under 80. I don't know if you knew that or not. She's under 80. So you're telling me that the Democratic Party does not have a place for her in leadership? Do you know how insane that is?
It is categorically insane. It is actually the litmus test that the Democrats do have, which is if you are exciting and thrilling and galvanizing to people, please stay away from any important role in our party.
No job here.
No job here. She doesn't have reading glasses yet, as far as I know. And that really, really disqualifies her.
Right.
And she is capturing, as you say, not just progressives anymore. There's also an evolution of the story from 2018. It's 7 years later. She's actually speaking to all kinds of people at those fighting oligarchy rallies. 8 to 10% of people are Republicans showing up. Right?
It's so interesting.
And if you, at the center of these power systems and institutions, are the last to know what people are feeling, this republic is in even more danger than we thought.
Oh, my God.
And by the way, Jonathan O'Meara, if people have a drinking game and they drink every time we say Steve Bannon's name, get your shot glass ready.
What, is it vodka?
Yeah.
Vodka, I guess.
All right.
I don't know.
Let's go.
But whatever it is this morning, Steve Bannon, what does he say about AOC? Which, just to explain, again, there were people who voted for Bernie Sanders in a primary in 2016 that voted for Donald Trump. You hear Steve Bannon and some MAGA people talking about AOC, and what do they say?
Bannon says of AOC that she's, first of all, she's a very talented political athlete, that her message, this populist message, resonates, and that she shares some overlap, frankly, with some of the things that he and the MAGA crowd believe in, and that also that he's afraid of her as the future of the Democratic Party, that she is, in his estimation, someone who could win and win big down the road.
All right.